So I'm just going to do a quick explanation of how the pelvis should work in terms of the amount of lateral movement or the pelvis sway, the rotation and the side bends that we should have in our hip movement or in our pelvis movement. The term sway is always seen as a negative term in terms of golf tuition. You always see online that you should sort of swing between the barrel or have a limited amount of movements. Now, on our gear system we use here, we capture elite players, we've got tour players, golf swings on here. Now, we see every elite player has an amount of sway. You can't really swing the golf club to any standard if you don't have some kind of lateral movement or some kind of lateral sway. It's the timing of that lateral sway and the amount of lateral sway which makes someone elite from recreational. So what we tend to see, the better players have between 1/2 inch and 1.5 inches of lateral movement early doors, okay? Now the key is early doors. We want our lateral sway over with when the club is furthest away from the target, okay? What we tend to see with the amateur golfer is they are very, very static to start with. They are stuck in the mud. They don't have any movement. They take the club 3/4 of the way back and then they have their movement off the golf ball. Sometimes the right amount, sometimes way too much, sometimes too little. But the issue is they're static to start and then they have a movement right late. Now what this does, this puts them into a poor position at the top of the swing and is not recoverable. It puts them onto the lateral border of their right foot into a position that isn't recoverable to then shift pressure, shift momentum into downswing early enough. Whereas the professional or the elite player will have a little bit of movement initially so that they then got time to stabilise, recenter. They're using their right toe to pressure into the floor. This gives them a really good base to hit from. So a really key takeaway from the lateral movement is we are absolutely allowed a little bit of lateral movement early. What we don't want is that lateral movement late, and by the time we get to the top, we want that right hip to have recentered back into its initial start spot. So we get to roughly 0 where we started at. Now, in terms of the side bends and the rotations, now we want symmetry, okay? Now we want these hips changing level. We don't want these hips staying flat in the backswing, okay? The left knee will increase in flex, the right knee will decrease in flex, okay? Now what this does, this adds a tilt to my pelvis, okay? Ideally we like to see about a 10-degree tilt. So what we can do is stick a alignment rod through our belt loops. We can see that visually with that right hip raising. Now what this tilt does, it restricts the amount of rotation that we can get. If I just turn really flat, I can over-rotate my pelvis, okay? So we want these knees changing level, okay? We don't want these knees staying flat. We can't create any ground forces with flat knees and flat hips. We want that right hip slightly higher than the left hip. If you take a look at our gear system, what you can see is at the top of the backswing, we tend to see roughly 35 degrees of rotational movement and about 10 degrees of side bend. Now we want that symmetry at the point of impact. So we want to return open 35 and we want again roughly 10 degrees of lead side bend at the point of impact. Now what this does, this tells us that we're using the ground properly. Most players who come over the top keep that left hip really low and the right hip high for ages. Okay, so it tells us that we've used the ground and that we're using our legs to create some power. It also shallows the arc down at the bottom of the swing. So on the gear system, we tend to see nearly excessive rotation on the way back, flat hips, and no side bend at the point of impact with not a lot of rotation in the amateur golfer, and then the complete opposite in the professional. So a really easy exercise or drill, so you can visualize the right amount of side bend, you can visualize the right amount of rotation, is to put an alignment rod through your belt loops. So we want that alignment rod at address, nice and flat. We don't want any crazy tilts initially. Okay, we want a nice neutral pelvis at address. Now, as we start to rotate to the top of our backswing, we should see a slight raise of the right side and a lower of the left side. That's if I'm pivoting properly. That's if my knees are changing levels properly. That's if my hips are moving the way they should. So as I start to rotate, we can see this right hip has raised, okay? The left hip has lowered, okay? Now, From here, as I then start to make my downswing movement, we don't want to flip these straight away. We want to keep that left hip low initially, so we're staying in left side bend initially. Then as we get to roughly last club parallel, this is when we should see that left hip raise, right hip lower. So that we've got the difference in the knee flexes again now. The left knee has less flex, the right knee has more flex. This is a good indicator that we're using the ground properly. The pelvis is lifting, lengthening. The left knee, left hip and left shoulders, allowing the club to go round the corner. We're using lots of ground force and vertical. Nice flat spot down at the golf ball. It's just a really easy visual for you to see. It's in your face, so you can make sure that you got it right. If that's raised and raised, if it's too flat, okay, then that's no good for us.